Paddington's first Christmas with the Browns was a day to remember. The night before, on Mrs. Bird's instructions, he'd hung a pillowcase on the end of his bed, and next morning he found to his surprise that it was full of parcels. Paddington liked parcels, and he lost no time in opening them. There was a chemistry outfit, a new scrapbook from Mr. Gruber, and a xylophone. Soon the whole house was awake. "I'm as patriotic as the next man," grumbled Mr. Brown, "but I draw a line when bears start playing the national anthem at 6 o'clock in the morning." "There's no need to stand to attention, Henry," said Mrs. Brown. "I'm not standing to attention. I'm stuck to the floor. Look." "Oh, gosh," said Judy, "that must be the instant glue I gave him for his new scrapbook." "Christmas," groaned Mr. Brown. "Perhaps you'd like to give a hand with the dinner, Paddington," said Mrs. Bird. "There's a lot to be done." "I could test your gravy with some litmus paper from my new chemistry set, Mrs. Bird," said Paddington. "Bears are very good at testing gravy." See what I mean? Paddington had never eaten one of Mrs. Bird's Christmas dinners before, but he had to admit it was worth waiting for. The table was groaning with good things. There was an enormous plate of turkey to start with, which he soon polished off. And that was followed by mince pies, which went the same way. But best of all was Mrs. Bird's Christmas pudding with custard. Well, Paddington, what do you think of it? Was it worth waiting for? "It was very nice, Mrs. Bird," said Paddington, "except I had a bone in my Christmas pudding." "A bone," repeated Mrs. Brown. "You can't have a bone in a Christmas pudding." "I did," said Paddington firmly. "It was all hard. I nearly broke a tooth." "Mercy me, you know what he's done." "Quick," said Mr. Brown, "we'd better turn him upside down." And before Paddington had time to say anything else, he found himself standing on his head in a corner of the room. "Try jumping up and down," suggested Mrs. Brown. I'm trying to, only it's not easy with paws." "Perhaps we could try using a magnet," suggested Jonathan. "I've got a great big one upstairs." "A magnet?" repeated Paddington. "I've never heard of a bone magnet before." "It's not a bone," said Judy. "It's a 5-penny piece. It's supposed to be lucky. If you find it, you can make a wish." "Lucky," repeated Paddington. "I don't see anything lucky about nearly swallowing a 5-pence. I feel sick." "You mean you haven't swallowed it?" Mr. and Mrs. Brown looked at each other. "Why ever didn't you say?" asked Judy. "Nobody asked me," said Paddington. He was about to wish he'd not eaten quite so much Christmas dinner. Then he changed his mind. For really it had been quite the nicest one he'd ever had. So instead he made another wish. Then he pointed to his 5-pence. "Perhaps you'd like a go now, Mr. Brown?" he suggested. No, thank you. I think perhaps I'll leave it until next Christmas. And the way time flies, it won't be long to wait." "That's funny, Mr. Brown. That means my wish is